There's a game, a bit of an underrated gem that I see many people criticize, that has incredibly realistic visuals, insane sound design, amazing yet also simple game mechanics, and what is essentially an optional story in a massive open world that allows you to explore whatever you want in however way you want to do it. Sounds great, right? Yeah, that was Generation Zero, a game released back in May of 2019 and developed by Avalanche Studios Group, published by the same company, and built using the coveted Apex engine. Generation Zero is a game that has had a very rough start from the beginning. You're thrown into a massive post-disaster world where the only thing you know starting out is something has gone horribly wrong. Now you must scavenge, fight, and sneak your way through dozens of forms of terrain and biomes to survive. But when it was first released, Generation Zero had a significant number of problems as a game in general. But after roughly 3 years, a good number of people had begun to change the tune they were singing about it. Although, when I look back at these reviews and their tribulations about the game, one element tends to stick out in this game above most of anything, and that is the environmental and sound design. For Generation Zero in particular, the game has a wide variety of environments, from snowy hillsides to open muddy farming grounds. The thing all of these different environments provide, no matter their diversity, comes from everything inside of them. They're presented with clear wreckages of human civilization, with remnants of a series of horrible events that can only imply but never reveal. This in and of itself is enough to cause tension in Generation Zero's players, especially if they are playing for their first time. This is not the only reason. There never seems to be a shortage of an upsetting feeling on one's stomach, the feeling that you are possibly just lucky, and if you lose focus for just a moment, can end up like everyone else on the island the game takes place in. It is with these factors specifically that tension also never seems to cease in the quest to keep you on your edge. However, the environment itself is not all that does the job. As you explore throughout the game, it plays a heavy soundtrack that arguably is built specifically to tip off the player and keep them from having any relaxed state, which is reinforced by its low tunes and almost heartbeat-style bassline. The heartbeat element is something I admire, and while it may seem insignificant, it has a way of reminding you of the frailty of life. The fact that you're still alive for every step you take, yet can be taken away from one error of interpretation. But what happens when tension is realized? Dread, in a way, can be a heightened sense of tension, or even tension itself realized into something much closer to fear. Take, for example, you're moving through the woods. If someone that was chasing you has lost you, you would at least feel tense. But what happens when you hear footsteps? That's when it turns to dread. Just as with the machines in Generation Zero, staying constantly hidden provides a sense of dread if anything gains even a slight visual towards you or turns unexpectedly. Hearing the machinery and the whirring of power through their circuits is a powerful example, as this audio is indeed modeled in-game. But when it truly comes to it, there is one subject in particular that should be given some extra emphasis. All you need to know to identify what this assailant is through a simple series of sounds. Have a listen. Those sounds of whirring machinery and echoing pulses are all that are needed to not only frighten new players, but even put veteran players on edge. If you've played the game for any major length of time, you should know exactly what this is. The tank. A massive, tall as buildings, burly, two-legged mech. It emits powerful levels of sound, with echoing pulses of noise and its thundering footsteps, which are almost enough to reenact the T-Rex encounter scene from the first Jurassic Park movie. Whenever someone hears this, the tank in some extent becomes a symbol of death. But that is not the only thing I find in the beauty of its sound design. The true colors are shown with a third and final major element: fear. When it comes to games and sound, especially environmentally heavy games such as Generation Zero, sound becomes fundamental to its atmosphere and immersive quality. While not a horror-styled game, Generation Zero does nail one thing in particular about its sound that makes even simple encounters seem incredibly risky: fear. It is capable of unnerving noises and sounds of machinery that don't even seem human-made. It has giant machines that are, despite their disheveled looks, quite formidable and greatly urge the player to use stealth over engaging in combat, further enforcing it by not only making enemies incredibly tough or sometimes numerous, but also making the player themselves feel small and weak in comparison to them. This cannot be emphasized more by the tank, which, as explained moments ago, is a massive, powerful enemy. But its size alone is not what makes the tank so intimidating, let alone hard to fight. It is almost arguable that the sound design for the tank was specifically designed to throw off the player, and to challenge them in more than one way. When facing something as intimidating looking as a tank, and having it reinforced not only with realistic visuals, but also incredibly detailed sound, it will actually make people fail to see just how simple of an enemy it really is. In reality, most of the enemies in Generation Zero are not only incredibly simple, but even underwhelming in many ways. Considered by the community, the most dangerous enemy is not the tank, but something only roughly a quarter its size, being the hunters. The smallest enemy in the game, ticks, are incredibly simple enemies that can only attack the player in 2 different ways. In fact, this goes for 3 of the 7 total enemy types that can actually appear in the game, which is a large roster of enemy types, even with their variation. Runners only have a simple firearm and the ability to charge at their target. The same also goes with lynxes, albeit they resort to melee weapons the least often. While I should mention that the enemies in this game have many weapon combinations depending on the class and type, when talking about specific available options for an enemy, there isn't a lot of difference. While the tank, in comparison, has many more options to fight its enemies, the execution of how it combats players is extremely simple. They typically stand at further range than other units and open fire with their rocket launchers or autocannon. If a player manages to get within close range, it will release either a toxic cloud of gas or a strong shockwave to get the player away from it. Despite this incredibly simple design, the sounds themselves can toss players into a fight that tricks them into thinking it is much more formidable than it actually is. This isn't to say the tank is a meaningless hunk of loot, it's anything quite the opposite. In reality, it is still powerful compared to most of the enemies in Generation Zero, but the moment you enter an engagement with a tank, you are almost instantly met with the sounds of blaring alarms, lights turning red, and the massive 2-legged beast of disorderly industrial hazards turns towards you and opens fire. At the same time, music of course kicks in, which can not only help to push the player past dread and into fear, but also make them panic. As the bullets start to fly, the player is put directly into the scope of what they are really fighting: a weapon out for blood. When doing this for this first time, it can send players into an outright panic. This is where we run into an age-old reflex called fight or flight. In a panic state, a person will resort to either run away or avoid the oncoming target, or maybe to just stand and fight it until either the enemy or themselves are destroyed. Should the player choose to fight, it is in this state that they can make a drastically increased number of mistakes that they would not make in normal circumstances. My point is here, and while this may not be the same case for every game out there, is that even though many elements of a game can be lacking, it can very easily make up for it via its sound and environmental design.